The Council of the Americas commends Senator McCain's efforts to advance open markets, rule of law, representative democracy, and human rights throughout the hemisphere. So with this in mind, please join me in once again applauding John McCain, the recipient of this year's Chairman's Award. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, John. And maybe you intentionally didn't mention that it was over 20 years ago when you and I first visited, when you were our outstanding ambassador to Mexico. I believe the year was 1989, but I'm not sure. And I think you did a magnificent job, and you have continued to serve with distinction and honor, and I'm proud to call you a friend. And I want to say that I appreciate the warm welcome. That's not always the case here lately. In case you missed it, there's a recent poll that was favorability of just about everything in American life was gauged favorability. And members of Congress ranked just below a colonoscopy. Now, since I have some familiarity with that, I was especially appalled at that. Approval rating is 11% of members of Congress. We are down to paid staffers and blood relatives. And I went through Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport this past few days ago, and a guy ran up to me and said, "Hey," he said, "anybody ever tell you look a lot like Senator John McCain?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Doesn't it sometimes just make you mad as hell?" So I appreciate your warm welcome. John, would you indulge me if I ask the waiters to go ahead and serve while I'm talking? I don't mind. I just hate to keep people from, is that agreeable to our members of our staff? Thank you. Thank you. Since I had a 45-minute speech prepared on the, I thought you might be interested in continuing that. Can I, one of the benefits of being around for a while is the perspective that it offers. I've literally been involved in the Americas my entire life. I was born in the Panama Canal Zone, and today I'm the ranking member, as you mentioned, the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee. I've traveled often and extensively through the region, most recently on a recent visit to Mexico, where I was not only impressed with the new president of Mexico, but I was also very impressed with the team with which he has surrounded himself. Some of the best and brightest people that I have met, and I say that with some parochialism because most of them are graduates of our most impressive institutions in this country. So I was very impressed with him, and I have great hopes for the country of Mexico and our relations. I don't want to waste too much of your time, and I'll be glad to answer questions about it. But on the issue of comprehensive immigration reform, I'd just like to say that I am guardedly optimistic that we will pass it. I continue to be concerned about people who, well, let me put it this way. The 8 of us had hundreds of hours of intense negotiation, and compromises were made. I would like to have written the bill myself, and it would be somewhat different, but I didn't write it myself. And so there compromises have to be made, and if there are efforts made to destroy that delicate compromise, then it could fall apart. I hope and pray that it doesn't. I'd like to remind you that I saw a poll recently, several polls recently, that about 70% of the American people believe that if people who are in this country illegally pay back taxes, pay a fine, learn English, have a background check, and very importantly, get in line behind those who have waited legally, then the overwhelming majority of the American people are supportive of it. And I'd just like to point out to you again, the state as it is today, with 11 million people in this country illegally, is de facto amnesty. Everybody, the opponents talk about amnesty, it's de facto amnesty. So I believe the time has come, and I also say as a proud member, a Reagan Republican, I say to my friends in the Republican Party, if we pass comprehensive immigration reform, it will not mean a single vote from the Hispanic community. But what it will do is put us on a playing field where we can compete for our Hispanic voters. We cannot without having passed this legislation. So, and I would also point out something that's the obvious. If we don't pass it, if we don't get it done this time, it'll be many, many years before we address this issue again. And I have tried to point out to some of my colleagues that the last time I tried with my beloved Ted Kennedy, I lost, but also was able to secure the nomination of my party for President of the United States. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is I lost, but after I lost, I slept like a baby. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry, sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. And I'd like to ask your sympathy for the families of the state of Arizona, if I might, because Barry Goldwater from Arizona ran for President of the United States. Congresswoman Mo Udall from Arizona ran for President of the United States. Former Governor of Arizona, Bruce Babbitt, ran for President of the United States from Arizona. I, from Arizona, ran for President of the United States. Arizona may be the only state in America where mothers don't tell their children that someday they can grow up and be President of the United States. I'd like to touch on a few issues with you, and then I'd like to respond to any questions or comments or insults that you might have. Trade, obviously, we have excellent trade relations with many of our neighbors, Chile, Mexico, Colombia, Peru. I still think historians will look at the 20th century and United States relations in our hemisphere and view NAFTA as one of the seminal events. And that was a Democrat and Republican bipartisan effort that I think has already paid enormous benefits. We have to expand that. We have to expand it as much as we possibly can. We all know how important Brazil is to the economy of our hemisphere. And I would love to see a free trade agreement with Brazil, but all of those countries, all of us. And if we're going to compete with the Asia-Pacific region, where the world's economy has shifted, we're going to have free trade agreements in our hemisphere. Obviously, I'm all for free trade agreements wherever they are, but in our hemisphere, I think it's a good place for us to begin. I'd like to point out that the leaders that I have met in our hemisphere are very attuned to those priorities. They know that we need to, if they're going to be able to pursue their hopes and their dreams, that free trade is an important part of it. I want to talk to you about one of the issues that we don't talk about in immigration reform, and we don't talk a lot about it in this country, and that's the issue of drugs. Now, I believe that the immigration reform bill that we have passed will make tremendous progress in gaining effective control of our border. Because a big part of that immigration reform bill is that we'll require every employer to require someone who comes to work for them to have an E-Verify, a document that is tamper-proof. And if that employer hires someone without that, that employer will be subject to prosecution. that dries up the magnet. When the word gets out that unless you come to this country legally, and there are very generous guest worker programs associated with this legislation, then the magnet dries up. So it's not only border security, but it's E-Verify. But there's another part of this problem, my friends, and that's called drugs. Right now, today, there are guides sitting on mountaintops in Arizona, on the Sonora, Arizona border, guiding these drug dealers as they move forward and carry the drugs past Tucson up to Phoenix and are distributed throughout the country. The major distribution place in America is Phoenix, Arizona. And I can't tell my constituents that they'll, especially in the southern part of the state, that they're not going to be safe from people coming across their property. And so as much as I hate and detest the drug dealers and the drug cartels, who's creating the demand? Who's creating the demand? Unless we address this problem as a society, they will get drugs into this country because it's a fundamental of economics. And they'll dig tunnels, and they'll use ultralights, and they'll build submarines. Some of us here have seen the submarines that have been built in order to get this terrible product that's killing our children into our country. So the next time we belabor our Mexican friends for the drug cartels, and the next time we talk about how Colombia has made tremendous progress, and they have, but there's still a huge problem, let's try to consider the fact that if we weren't creating the demand for these drugs, that they wouldn't be, we would not have the problem with the people we have. And by the way, I had a long conversation with the president of Mexico, and they're trying to look at this whole issue of the drug cartels from a different perspective. Now, whether that will succeed or not, I don't know. But any country that's lost 60,000 of their citizens as victims of these drug cartel wars is, I think, appropriately examining the way that they address the issue of drugs. And I'm not saying they're going to come up with the right answer, but I do think the new president of Mexico has got, it's appropriate that he at least look at the strategy that they've been employing. A lot of our people are nervous that we may not get the kind of cooperation from the Mexican authorities that we got in the past, and I share that nervousness. But I'm not sure you could argue that what we've been doing for the past several years has been as successful as we had hoped it would be. We read all the time about how we've arrested people, how people have been killed. We know the names of the leaders of the drug cartel. We know, everybody knows who Guzman is. We all know that. But the fact is that the price of an ounce of cocaine has not gone down 1 penny in the streets of Chicago, New York, L.A., and other major cities in America. So as much as we celebrate all these people we've intercepted and all these people we've arrested and deported to the United States, the ultimate test is what's the cost of an ounce of cocaine or a pound of marijuana or the methamphetamine that is the most vicious of all, as you know, that's coming into our country. I'd also like to point out that one of the kind of interesting phenomena we're seeing on the border is more and more people who are being apprehended are OTM, other than Mexican. So we're even starting to see people come across the border from countries like Africa, continents, other continents like Africa and others. And this brings up, of course, terrorism. And that is an argument for making sure that we are have a border that is secure from the movement of people who want to come to this country and commit acts of terror. The recent tragedy in Boston has revealed some parts of our immigration system that need to be fixed. These two brothers were able to, the older brother was able to leave the country and only one agency knew about it. He came back and none of the agencies knew about it. I won't go through the whole TikTok with you, but the whole reason why we had the 9/11 Commission and implemented those recommendations was to prevent the stovepiping, that agencies didn't share information. Well, I think in this case you could argue that there was stovepiping. And so we're going to have to review all of that. And I think part of it could be reviewed in our comprehensive immigration effort. So there's a lot of focus on the Middle East these days, and obviously it is very important that we do so. As you know, I've been heavily engaged. But I also think that our own hemisphere is a place where perhaps we can take some pride. I think when John was was our ambassador to Mexico, not that long ago, really, it's been a world of difference, not just in Mexico, but who, by the way, and I believe Mexico is poised with the right legislation of deregulation of their telecommunications, better exploitation of their hydrocarbons, and a couple other things. They are poised for takeoff. And so are other countries. Look at what has happened in Brazil. Look what's happened in Chile. Look at the enormous progress that has been made since the days that John served as our ambassador. And so I think there's a bright future for our hemisphere. I'm guardedly optimistic. But I'd also like to point out that there are some Central American countries where things are not so good. Things are really not so good. And I think it's up to us to try to help these people where drugs is particularly impactful on the corruption side, that we should do a lot more to try to and pay attention to them and give them some assistance. I'd finally like to say that, the other day it was Cinco de Mayo, which is celebrated greatly here, not in Mexico, of course, but naturally it wouldn't be there. But when you look at the contributions that our Hispanic friends have made to our country, not just the country of Mexico, but throughout our hemisphere, it's the same story that has been repeated time after time after time in the history of this country. And that is that people come to this country and they grab the bottom rung and they move up the ladder and they succeed. That's why we have so many people from all over the world who want to come to this land of opportunity. Now, I have a whole lot of problems with a lot of things in our country, the debt and all of those kinds of things. But every place I go in the world, and especially in our hemisphere, we're still the shining city on a hill. We're still the country that they would like to be most like. So it seems to me that the least we can do is pay attention to our neighbors in this hemisphere and do the right things. Do the right things with them. And one of the things, honestly, to start with, maybe is to pay more attention to them. As our attention is diverted to the Middle East and Europe and other parts of the world, our problems with Russia and China. But second of all, I believe that the closeness that grows every single day, the kind of blending between our societies and our customs and our traditions makes for a very great chance for a future and opportunity. So John, I thank you for this award. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be back. Last time I was here was when my friend John Kerry was sworn in as Secretary of State. He's doing a shitty job, so thank you very much.
Take questions from the audience here. There's somebody with a mic, and all I would ask is, okay, Ambassador. Needs no introduction, the Ambassador of Costa Rica.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for your words about Latin America. As you know, Costa Rica has no army, so we're fighting against organized crime with institutions and prevention, etc. I know, and fortunately, we're doing very well economically, so that helps us. There's going to be a meeting of the Organization of American States General Assembly in Guatemala in June, and the President of Guatemala has requested that the topic be how to combat drug trafficking and organized crime. And my question to you is, do you not think it really would be a good idea for not just the hemisphere, because now it's a global problem, for there to be a concerted revisiting of the whole issue of how to combat these evils that goes way beyond legalization? It is much more complicated and subtle than that. And would you welcome that kind of effort?
I not only welcome it, I think it's urgent. As you know, and we won't name the other countries in Central America, but they are really on the verge of being co-opted. They're small countries, a lot of money, a lot of gangs. Some of them are in prison in the United States, as you know, and it's a serious problem. So in this bright scenario that all of us would like to paint, that is certainly a cloud that overhangs all of it. You know, quite a few years ago, we had a first lady that said, look, the slogan was just say no to drugs. Right now, in the movies, television, entertainment, not only is the use of drugs acceptable, it's glamorized. It's glamorized with young people. I don't think I'm a prude, but I don't think that we should, I think in a way we should put pressures on the entertainment industry to say, hey, don't, you know, you can make a great movie or a great television series without making it one of not only acceptable but desirable thing to use cocaine, particularly. It seems that that's the case. So, again, I'm not putting all the blame on the United States of America, but I do believe that we ought to do a lot more in this country on the use of drugs and the, look, they just legalized marijuana in Arizona. I asked the U.S. Attorney the other day, I said, hey, here we are. We intercept a vehicle coming across from down in Nogales, and we find 50 pounds of marijuana, and it's in the paper, way to go, you know. Meanwhile, they're growing it in their basement legally. I mean, I said, what do you do about that kind of situation? He says, you know what he said? I don't know. I don't know. And so it's something that I think at least we ought to, the reason why I'm saying, we ought to start acknowledging that aspect of it. We ought to start acknowledging that as long as there is a demand for any product, that there's going to be a supply. I don't happen to think that legalization of drugs is the answer. I think there's European examples that some countries in Europe did it and now are really backing off from it. I mean, Zombie Park, I think, in Amsterdam and places like that. But it's something that we have to address. And for a small Central American country, one of which capital, I believe, is the murder capital of the world, this is a very serious issue. And I hope, and I'm glad you're addressing it, and I hope that one of the resolutions that comes out of this meeting is putting a little pressure on the United States of America. Goodbye.
Yes, over there.
Senator, it's an honor to say hi to you. I'm Juan Gutierrez from Guatemala. We just mentioned Guatemala as a country with serious problems. Want to thank you for the interest and the big efforts you have done before and now on the immigration reform, which I believe is crucial. But on both areas, the fight against narco-traffic and the immigration, I think there is one element that is always missing from discussion, and it's the prevention, not only on preventing drug consumption and all that, but how else can we prevent those countries to become so dependent on the narco-traffic and also on sending their people illegally to move to the United States? And I'm talking about development in the Central American region. I like to see some proposals towards how to promote development together with fighting drugs, together with the immigration reform, but creating joint projects between the United States and the Central American countries and Mexico in order to promote development so people over there live better, they have a better future, they don't need to immigrate illegally, And also, they don't need to get involved with narco traffic, or they're less inclined to do so, because one of the problems with gangs is that the reason kids get involved into that is because they have no future, and they feel like joining a gang gives them the future. Thank you.
I agree. I remember in Colombia, I guess it was a couple of years ago, I went out and saw one of these submarines that they have built. And I said, gee, this must be really, and they had hired engineers to do it and qualified people to build one of these submarines that goes just below the surface of the water, very hard to track. And I said, gee, I said, it must have been very, very expensive. And the guy said, yeah, it cost them about $5 million to build this submarine. And he said, but you know, I don't know if you know it or not, but one trip, they make $15 million. So it's a pretty good investment for them. And so what's the loss of a submarine when one trip is sufficient? One of the things that and you may not like this answer, but the Mexican and Guatemalan government have to do more on their border security. It's just not what we would want it to be. And when we talk about border security, could I just say, it has nothing with me, as far as I'm concerned, and I hope most Americans, about keeping people out. What it has to do is preserving a fair system where anybody from all over the world can have an equal opportunity to come to the United States of America, rather than having the advantage of proximity. America, as I said, is based on waves of immigrants who have come to this country, whether they're Irish or Italian or Poles or Jews or whatever. They've all come, and the latest, of course, being the Hispanic wave. But I want everybody to have an equal opportunity. That's why it's up to us to control our borders so that we can be sure the right people come into our country and everybody has an equal opportunity. Look, I know that Guatemala is under a lot of pressure in a lot of ways. And there's some unhappy past chapters that the Guatemalan government and people are trying to get resolved. And I don't know all the answers in fact, I have no recommendation, except that I know that in past times in other countries, I have seen truth and reconciliation commissions be successful. I'm not saying that's the answer in Guatemala, but I think it's an option that maybe should be considered.
Okay, time for maybe one last question.
Notice colleague and friend Bennett Johnson is here. Bennett, it's quite wonderful to see you. His colleague John Breaux once said, "My vote is not for sale, but it's for rent."
Thank you, Senator. You have mentioned several times Guatemala. I'm the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Guatemala. I think the good news that I want to give you, one is that better than having just a secure border, it's a border that produces progress for its people. And we're working together with Mexico on creating opportunities, economic opportunities on both sides of the border, so that people in southern Mexico and in Guatemala and in Central America have a fair opportunity of developing themselves in their own country and not having to migrate to the U.S. Second thing is that I think it's important to know that in the last 3 years, we have had a descending rate of homicides in Guatemala, which proves that we can do better justice systems and better security systems in our countries. Still it's too high, but I think as the case of Colombia has shown before, we can prevail over organized crime in many different countries. And we have captured 9 of the most important drug traffickers of Guatemala as well. So fighting impunity and fighting organized crime is possible. But as you have mentioned before, the drug issue is not just an issue of organized crime. It has a demand side and it has a health side that has to be addressed. A social problem has to be addressed. And I think this is the most important message we have tried to send in the last year since from Guatemala. President Otto Perez has been very outspoken saying we need a new deal on drug issue because what we're doing today, we may succeed over organized crime, but we cannot succeed over drug trafficking if demand continues to exist in the world.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Minister, and I know that you have these significant challenges. I know you appreciate them. All I can say is that I believe that our President Obama, and his Secretary of State are very committed to being as much assistance as they possibly can be to you. I was very pleased at the President's trip to Mexico and Costa Rica. I hope he will take more trips. I'd like to get him out of the country more often. But it's hard for Americans to imagine. It's hard for the average American to imagine the impact of a President of the United States visit to a country. It really matters. And so I'm very glad the President went, and in my conversations with him, I know he intends to do more travel in the hemisphere. And it really is the future in many aspects of our nation and our hemisphere. I'd just like to point out again to you, the world is changing so dramatically. It's not just the Arab Spring. But my friends, the United States of America, in 10 to 20 years, if we do it right, will be energy independent. Think of how that changes our nation's priorities. If we can move forward with free trade agreements, we are now seeing jobs coming back to the United States of America because of our manufacturing technologies. So we could see a hemisphere that is free of dependency on foreign hydrocarbons, which changes our priorities, and one that has a really strong economy if we will do the right thing as far as a grand bargain is concerned to get our entitlements under control and our debt under control and our revenues under control. I believe that this president, like all presidents in their second term, is looking at his legacy. I think that's why he wanted to go to Mexico and Costa Rica. I think he's interested in seeing accomplishments. The president has been nothing but supportive of us on the issue of comprehensive immigration reform. He's been totally supportive for the work that we've been doing. Conversations are beginning about a grand bargain. And I'm convinced that there are other areas that the president is going to seek cooperation. Now, whether some in my party cooperate or whether the president is really serious to take that last step that's necessary to seal a deal, I can't tell you. I can tell you he's got a very able assistant in Joe Biden who knows, I think you would agree, Bennett, he knows the Senate and he knows how to work across the aisle with our colleagues. So despite the words of Chairman Mao, who once said it's always darkest before it's totally black, I am by nature an optimist, and I thank all of you for listening to me, and I hope you enjoy your lunch. Thank you.